Why silence feels so uncomfortable. You thought silence was nothing. You were wrong. What if I told you that the most dangerous place you will ever sit is a quiet room with no phone, no music, and no distractions? Not dangerous because of what is outside. Dangerous because of what is inside. Because the moment everything goes quiet, something wakes up. Something you have been running from for years. And in the next few minutes, you are going to find out exactly what that is. And why your brain will do almost anything to make sure you never have to face it. Stay with me. Because this changes everything. Let us start with something simple. Something you have probably never questioned. Why do you feel weird when it is quiet? Not scared. Not sad. Just weird. Like something is off. Like the world is slightly wrong and you cannot explain why. You reach for your phone. You turn on music. You find something, anything, to fill that space. And you do it so fast, so automatically, that you do not even realize you are doing it. That automatic reach. That instinct to fill the silence. That is not a habit. That is a survival response. And it goes back much further than you think. Thousands of years ago, your ancestors lived in a world that was always making noise. Wind through trees. Animals in the distance. Other people nearby. Noise meant life. Noise meant safety. The tribe was close. The fire was burning. Everything was okay. But silence. Silence meant something had changed. The birds stopped singing because a predator was close. The rustling stopped because something was watching. In the ancient world, silence was not peaceful. It was a warning. And the humans who responded to that warning, who got alert, who got anxious, who got ready, those were the ones who survived. The ones who sat back and relaxed in the silence were often the ones who did not make it. So your brain, your modern brain sitting in your modern bedroom, still carries that ancient code. Still treats silence like a signal. Still fires up that alarm system the moment the noise drops away. You are not anxious because something is wrong. You are anxious because your brain thinks something might be. And that distinction, that tiny difference, is the key to understanding everything that comes next. Now here is where it gets interesting. Because the anxiety you feel in silence is not just about danger. It is about something much more personal. Much more uncomfortable. You see, noise does something very specific to your mind. It occupies it. It gives your brain something to do, something to process, something to focus on outside of yourself. Music tells your brain what to feel. Podcasts give your brain something to think about. Scrolling gives your brain an endless stream of new information. And all of that external input keeps your brain pointed outward. Away from you. Away from your thoughts. Away from the stuff you have not dealt with yet. But the moment the noise stops, your brain has nothing left to look at except itself. And for most people, that is the scariest place of all. Think about it. When was the last time you were completely alone with your thoughts? Not half distracted, not sort of listening to something in the background. Truly alone. No input. No stimulation. Just you and the inside of your own head. For some people, that happens maybe once a week. For others, almost never. Because we have built our lives in a way that makes it almost impossible to be alone with ourselves. We wake up and check our phones. We put on music in the shower. We listen to podcasts on the way to work. We eat lunch while watching videos. We fall asleep to Netflix. Every single moment of potential silence gets filled. And we do this not because we are lazy or distracted. We do this because on some level, we know. We know that if we stop filling the silence, something is going to come up. And we are not sure we are ready to deal with it. Psychologists have a name for this. They call it experiential avoidance. It is the tendency to avoid uncomfortable internal experiences. thoughts, feelings, memories, sensations. By controlling what is happening in your external environment. And noise is the perfect tool for experiential avoidance because it works instantly. The moment you feel that creeping discomfort of silence, you reach for your phone and it is gone. The feeling disappears. You feel better. And your brain logs that. It remembers that reaching for the phone made the bad feeling stop. So the next time silence comes, the urge to reach is even stronger. And the time after that, stronger still. Until one day you cannot sit through a 2-minute car ride without needing something playing. Until you feel a low-level anxiety almost all the time and you cannot quite figure out why. Because the thing you are avoiding does not go away just because you stop looking at it. It just gets louder. It just builds pressure. And the more you avoid it, the harder it gets to face it. Here is something that will probably hit close to home. Think about the last time you were really upset about something. Not a small frustration. Something real. Heartbreak, loneliness, failure, grief, fear. What did you do? Did you sit with it? Did you let yourself feel the full weight of it? Or did you immediately reach for something? Turned on a show. Called someone. Scrolled for an hour. Went to sleep early just to stop feeling it. Almost all of us do this. It is human. It is natural. But what it means is that we are carrying around years' worth of unfelt feelings. Experiences we never fully processed. Emotions we interrupted before they could complete. And all of that unprocessed material lives inside us. It does not disappear. It shows up as irritability. As anxiety that seems to come from nowhere. As a heaviness you cannot quite name. As that vague sense that something is missing or something is wrong even when your life looks fine from the outside. And when you sit in silence, all of that stuff starts to surface. Because silence removes the thing that was keeping it suppressed. And your mind, which has been trying to get your attention for years, finally has the chance to speak. This is why silence feels so uncomfortable. Not because of what is outside you. But because of what is inside. Because you are not running from an empty room. You are running from yourself. And somewhere deep down, you know that. Which is why the discomfort hits so fast. Which is why you fill the silence so automatically. Because part of you understands that if you actually stop and sit and listen, you are going to have to feel things you have been putting off feeling for a very long time. But here is the question that should be sitting in your chest right now. What is it that you are avoiding? What is the thought that comes up first when the noise stops? What is the feeling that creeps in at the edges of a quiet moment before you reach for your phone? That thing. Whatever just crossed your mind. That is the most important thing in your life right now. Not because it is scary. But because it is unfinished. It is incomplete. It is a part of your experience that never got the attention it needed. And until it does, it will keep showing up. Every quiet moment. Every lonely night. Every time the world gets still enough for you to hear it. Now let us go a layer deeper. Because this is where it gets really fascinating. Researchers at the University of Virginia did a study that shocked everyone. They put people in a room alone. No phone. No book. No music. Nothing. Just a chair and their thoughts. They could sit there for up to 15 minutes. Or they could press a button and give themselves an electric shock. An actual electric shock. And a significant number of people chose the shock. They preferred physical pain over sitting alone with their thoughts. Think about that. People would rather hurt themselves than be alone in the quiet. That is not a quirk. That is a statement about how unbearable our inner world has become. About how much we have accumulated inside ourselves that we do not want to face. And it raises a deeply uncomfortable question. If we are willing to hurt ourselves just to escape our own thoughts, what does that say about the relationship we have with ourselves? What have we built on the inside that we are so desperate to avoid? The answer, for most people, is not monsters. It is not darkness or madness. It is something much more ordinary. And much more painful. It is unmet expectations. It is the gap between the life you thought you would have by now and the life you actually have. It is the dreams you quietly gave up on. The relationships that did not work out. The version of yourself you were supposed to become. In the quiet, all of those gaps become visible. And that visibility is painful. Because it forces you to ask questions you have been avoiding. Am I happy? Am I on the right path? Is this the life I actually want? And most people are terrified of those questions. Not because they do not have answers. But because they are afraid the answers will require them to change something. To admit something. To grieve something. And that feels like too much. So they keep the noise going. They keep the distractions running. And they keep those questions safely buried beneath layers of content and noise and busyness. But here's the thing about buried questions. They do not stay buried. They come out sideways. They come out as restlessness. As that feeling on a Sunday evening when the weekend is almost over and you cannot quite explain why you feel sad. As the irritability that shows up when someone asks you if you are okay. As the way you feel slightly hollow even after a fun night out. As the inexplicable ache that shows up in the middle of an ordinary day. Those feelings are not random. They are the questions that you never answered. They are the thoughts that you never sat with. They are the parts of you that you silenced along with the noise. And they are getting louder. Let us talk about what actually happens in your brain when it gets quiet. Because there is something going on in there that most people have never been told about. When you are engaged with external stimulation, watching a video, listening to music, scrolling through content, your brain is in what researchers call a directed attention state. It is focused outward. It is processing information that is coming in from the outside world. But when the stimulation stops, something interesting happens. Your brain shifts into what is called the default mode network. This is a collection of brain regions that activate when you are not focused on anything external. When you are just thinking. Just being. Just existing. And what does the default mode network do? It does some of the most important cognitive work your brain is capable of. It processes memories. It works through unresolved problems. It makes sense of complex emotional experiences. It connects dots that your conscious mind could not connect while it was busy with everything else. In other words, the default mode network is where you figure things out. Where you understand yourself. Where you heal. And it only activates fully in the quiet. In the stillness. In the spaces between the noise. Which means every time you fill the silence with your phone or your music or your show, you are actively interrupting one of the most important processes your brain knows how to do. You are preventing yourself from healing. From growing. From understanding. And you are doing it unconsciously, every single day, because the discomfort of silence feels worse than the cost of avoiding it. Here is the midpoint of this story. And it is the part that most people miss. The part that changes the way you understand everything we have talked about so far. You have been told, in 1,000 different ways, that you need to manage your thoughts. Control your mind. Stay positive. Push the bad stuff away. Be productive. Stay busy. And there is a whole industry built around giving you tools to do exactly that. Apps and techniques and strategies for filling your mind with better content. For replacing bad thoughts with good ones. For keeping yourself occupied and engaged and stimulated. And all of that is built on one enormous, fundamental misunderstanding. The idea that your inner experience is something to be managed. Something to be controlled. Something to be fixed. But what if that is completely wrong? What if the discomfort you feel in silence is not a problem to be solved? What if it is a message to be heard? What if your mind is not malfunctioning when it gets loud in the quiet? What if it is working exactly as intended? Trying to tell you something you need to know. And every time you silence it with noise, you are not fixing the problem. You are refusing to read the letter. Think about what happens when you have a physical pain. A headache, a stomachache, pain somewhere in your body. Your first instinct might be to take something to make it stop. And sometimes that is the right call. But a good doctor will also ask why the pain is there. Because pain is information. Pain is your body communicating that something needs attention. And if you just keep numbing it without asking what it means, you might be missing something important. The discomfort of silence works the same way. It is your mind's version of pain. It is information. It is communication. It is your inner world trying to flag something that needs attention. And when you understand it that way, the whole relationship with silence changes. It stops being something to escape. It starts being something to listen to. Now I want to tell you about something that happens to people who actually start doing this. Who start sitting with the silence. Who stop running from their own minds. Because it does not go the way most people expect. The first thing that happens is it gets worse. When you first start sitting with the quiet, the discomfort intensifies. All the stuff you have been avoiding comes rushing in at once. The thoughts get louder. The feelings get bigger. And most people hit this point and decide that silence is just not for them. That they are too anxious, too sensitive, too much in their heads. And they go back to the noise. But the people who stay. The people who sit through that first wave of discomfort. Something shifts. The intensity peaks. And then it starts to soften. Not because the thoughts and feelings go away. But because they get heard. Because you stopped running long enough for them to do what they have always been trying to do. To surface. To be felt. To move through you. And on the other side of that, something remarkable happens. The anxiety that was always hovering just below the surface starts to lift. Not all at once. Not permanently. But noticeably. Because so much of what you have been calling anxiety is actually just unfelt emotion. Unexpressed thought. Unacknowledged experience. And silence is the place where all of that finally gets to breathe. There is a concept in psychology called emotional completion. The idea that emotions are not meant to be permanent states. They are meant to be processes. They rise, they peak, and if you let them, they fall. They move through you. They complete. But the only way for them to complete is if you actually feel them. If you let them rise without immediately pushing them back down. And most of us, most of the time, interrupt that process. We feel the beginning of something uncomfortable and we immediately reach for the escape hatch. We do not let the emotion complete. So it does not go anywhere. It just pauses. And waits. And every time you sit in silence, it starts rising again. Not because something is wrong with you. But because it is trying to finish. It is trying to complete the process you interrupted. And your job, if you can bear it, is simply to let it. This is what the most psychologically resilient people in the world understand. Not that they never feel hard things. Not that they have figured out how to think their way to happiness. But that they have learned to sit with discomfort. To let emotions rise and fall without panicking. To trust that the wave will pass if they stop fighting it. And that skill, that single skill, changes everything. It changes how you handle stress. How you handle relationships. How you handle failure and loss and uncertainty. Because when you are no longer terrified of your own inner experience, you stop making decisions based on what will keep you most comfortable. You start making decisions based on what actually matters. And that is when life starts to feel different. Not easier necessarily. But more real. More yours. More intentional. Let us talk about loneliness for a moment. Because it is deeply connected to everything we have been exploring. Most people experience loneliness as a need for other people. A need for connection, for company, for presence. And that is true. But there is another kind of loneliness that almost nobody talks about. The loneliness of being disconnected from yourself. Of not knowing what you actually feel. Of not being able to sit with yourself for 5 minutes without needing to escape. That kind of loneliness is different. You can have it surrounded by people. You can have it in a relationship. You can have it at a party. It is the feeling of being a stranger in your own inner world. Of having lost the thread back to yourself. And noise is one of the main reasons it happens. Because when you are always plugged in, always stimulated, always consuming, you never develop the relationship with yourself that makes you feel at home in your own mind. You become dependent on external input for your emotional regulation. For your sense of being okay. And that dependency is fragile. Because external things change. People leave. Circumstances shift. And if you have never learned to be with yourself, losing external stability feels like losing the floor beneath you. The people who handle life's hardest moments with the most grace are almost always people who have spent time in the quiet. Not because silence made them emotionally invincible. But because they know themselves. They have sat with their fears long enough to recognize them. They have felt their grief long enough to move through it. They have heard their own thoughts long enough to understand what they actually believe, what they actually want, what they actually need. And that self-knowledge is not something you can get from reading about yourself. It is not something you can get from therapy alone or journaling alone or any external process alone. It comes from sitting with yourself. From being present in the quiet. From having the courage to stop running. Here is something I want you to sit with. The version of you that you are most afraid to see in the silence. The one with the doubts and the grief and the unfinished questions. That version of you is not your worst self. That is your most honest self. That is the you that exists underneath all the performance and the busyness and the carefully constructed image you show to the world and even to yourself. And that honest self does not need to be fixed. Does not need to be managed. Does not need to be silenced with more noise. It needs to be met. It needs the thing that almost everyone is too busy or too scared to give it. Attention. Presence. Acknowledgement. Not solutions. Not strategies. Just the simple act of turning toward it and saying, I hear you. I am here. I am not running. And when you do that, when you actually stop running, something changes at a fundamental level. The silence stops being a threat. It stops being a place you have to escape from. And it starts being something you never expected it to be. A place you can return to. A place that feels, slowly and surprisingly, like home. This does not mean you will love silence overnight. It does not mean it will stop being uncomfortable. It probably will not. Not for a while. Not until you have sat with enough of the hard stuff that it starts to feel lighter. But the discomfort will become familiar. And familiar discomfort is something you can work with. It is something you can breathe through. It is something you can stop running from. And that shift, from running to staying, from avoiding to meeting, is one of the most important shifts a human being can make. Because everything that matters in life requires the ability to be present with discomfort. Every meaningful relationship. Every creative pursuit. Every honest conversation. Every moment of genuine courage. All of it requires you to stop reaching for the escape hatch. To stay in the room. To be with what is. In the end, the reason silence feels so uncomfortable is simple. And it is something you have known on some level this entire time. Silence is a mirror. And most of us are afraid of what we might see. Not because we are broken. Not because what is inside us is too terrible to face. But because we have been taught, in 1,000 different ways, to look outward. to look at screens and feeds and other people's lives. And we have forgotten how to look inward. We have lost the habit of meeting ourselves. And so the mirror feels strange. The reflection feels unfamiliar. But it is still you. It has always been you. And underneath the anxiety and the discomfort and the impulse to fill the quiet with anything that will make it stop, there is someone in there who deserves to be heard. Who has been waiting for a long time. Who has something important to say. And they are saying it in the only way available to them. In the silence between all the noise you use to drown them out. So the next time the room gets quiet. The next time you reach for your phone without knowing why. Try something different. Just for a moment. Put the phone down. Sit with what comes up. Let it rise. Let it be loud if it needs to be loud. Let it be uncomfortable if it needs to be uncomfortable. And see what happens on the other side of that. Because what is waiting for you in the silence is not what you are afraid of. It is what you have been looking for. In all the noise. All along. Now I want to hear from you. What is the one thought that always shows up when things get quiet? The one you always push away. Write it in the comments. You do not have to explain it. Just write it. Because naming it is the first step to no longer being afraid of it.